Let's start with Hippolyte Taine, the French critic and historian born in 1828. He is remembered as the originator of literary historicism, the idea that literature must be studied not in isolation but as part of history and society. His most famous work, History of English Literature, published between 1863 and 1869, is a text you should definitely pause on because it has been asked. In exam, Taine proposed that every literary work could be explained through three key forces: race, milieu, and moment. Race referred to the inherited character of a people, milieu meant the social environment, and moment represented the specific historical situation. For him, literature wasn't just art, it was a scientific product of these conditions. This deterministic framework heavily influenced French naturalism and also laid the groundwork for modern historicist criticism. Now, let's turn to Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most radical and influential modern thinkers. Born in 1844, Nietzsche's work challenged the very foundations of Western philosophy, morality, and religion. His famous declaration, "God is dead," is something you cannot afford to forget, because it has been asked in exam. What did he mean by this? That Enlightenment rationalism and secularism had eroded faith in traditional values, leaving modern society in a state of nihilism, a collapse of meaning and morality? Yes, nihilism itself is also asked in exam. Pause here because one of Nietzsche's earliest and most debated works is The Birth of Tragedy, published in 1872 and later revised in 1886 with his essay An Attempt at Self-Criticism. In this book, he argued that Greek tragedy was born from the tension between two forces, the Apollonian order, harmony, restraint, and the Dionysian chaos, passion, intoxication. Nietzsche believed that the rise of Socratic rationalism killed tragedy, replacing myth and poetic truth with cold reason. Initially ignored, the book stirred controversy because Nietzsche blended philology, philosophy, and aesthetics in unconventional ways. He even tied his vision of tragedy to Richard Wagner's music, though he later distanced himself from Wagner. Today, however, The Birth of Tragedy is seen as a cornerstone of modern cultural criticism, foreshadowing debates in existentialism, post-structuralism, and cultural theory. When we speak of world literature's towering figures, Leo Tolstoy immediately comes to mind. Born in 1828 into an aristocratic Russian family, Tolstoy lived a life full of contradictions, privileged by birth, yet fiercely critical of political, social, and religious institutions. Between 1901 and 1909, he was nominated several times for both the Nobel Prize in Literature and the Nobel Peace Prize, but never received either. Even today, that omission is seen as one of the great cultural controversies. Tolstoy's fame rests above all on his monumental realist novels. War and Peace, published in 1869, and Anna Karenina, published in 1878, are often described as the very pinnacle of 19th century fiction. His early trilogy, Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth, written between 1852 and 1856, first earned him acclaim, while Sevastopol Sketches from 1855, drawn from his experiences in the Crimean War, marked him as a brilliant chronicler of war. His shorter works, like Family Happiness, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, After the Ball, and the posthumously published Haji Murad, continue to reveal his genius for psychological and moral exploration. Pause here and note this. Tolstoy didn't only write fiction. His later years were consumed with philosophy, ethics, and a burning question, what is art? In his book with that very title, What is Art?, published in 1897, asked in exam, Tolstoy rejected the traditional idea that art should be measured by beauty or technical brilliance. Instead, he argued that true art must be judged by its ability to communicate sincere human emotion. By this radical standard, he dismissed Shakespeare, Wagner, and even Dante as failures, while elevating everyday practices like jokes, household decoration, or even religious ritual as valid forms of art. Tolstoy's severe critique of Shakespeare's King Lear provoked George Orwell to respond in his essay Lear, Tolstoy and the Fool, asked in exam. Orwell challenged Tolstoy's rigid moralism, but the debate he sparked between aesthetics and ethics, beauty and truth, remains alive even today. Let's step back into the 19th century, where criticism was still shaping its modern identity. These four figures, George Henry Lewes, Leslie Stephen, Thomas Babington Macaulay, and George Saintsbury, each gave Victorian criticism its distinctive voice, blending philosophy, history, politics, and style. We begin with George Henry Lewes. Remembered not just as George Eliot's lifelong partner, but as a critic and philosopher in his own right. Influenced deeply by positivism, Lewes believed that literature, like science, should be approached with clarity and precision. His book, The Principles of Success in Literature, published in 1865, laid out practical rules for writers emphasizing clarity, economy of expression, and sincerity. For Lewes, literature was not vague inspiration but a disciplined craft governed by psychological laws of communication. Now let's turn to Leslie Stephen, father of Virginia Woolf. As the first editor of the monumental Dictionary of National Biography, he helped shape how generations of readers encountered English history and culture. His criticism combined moral reflection with historical insight. He argued that literature cannot be divorced from the ethical and cultural frameworks in which it is produced. His insistence on honesty and intellectual seriousness bridged the earnestness of the Victorians with the modernist sensibility that his daughter and the Bloomsbury group would later embody. Next we come to Thomas Babington Macaulay, one of the great voices of Victorian intellectual culture. Historian, politician, essayist Macaulay poured energy into his essays for the Edinburgh Review. Whether he was writing on Milton, Machiavelli or Bacon, his style was vigorous, his moral tone unmistakable. For him, literature was inseparable from history and politics. His essays celebrated progress, liberty, and the shaping of national character. Though later critics accused him of whiggish optimism, his rhetorical brilliance secured him a lasting place in Victorian criticism. Finally, George Saintsbury, whose A History of Criticism and Literary Taste in Europe appeared between 1900 and 1904. Unlike Macaulay or Stephen, Saintsbury focused on stylistics, paying close attention to form, rhythm, and language. In this, he anticipated later approaches such as New Criticism and Formalism. His work roamed widely across European traditions, situating English criticism within a larger intellectual story. While his judgments could be idiosyncratic, his careful analysis of style made him a foundational figure for the study of criticism itself. When we talk about the novel as a serious art form, one towering figure is Henry James. Though American by birth, James became a central presence in Victorian and Edwardian England, shaping how modern criticism thinks about narrative form and realism. His essay, The Art of Fiction, published in 1884, remains one of the most important works in literary criticism, and yes, it was asked in exam. Now, this essay was written as a response to Walter Besant, who had argued for prescriptive rules in novel writing. James rejected those rigid rules and defended the writer's freedom. For him, the novel was nothing less than a direct impression of life asked in exam. He beautifully described experience as a huge spider web that catches fragments of life, imagination, and perception. Pause here and note this. James dismantled the old divide between character and incident. He asked, what is character but the determination of incident? What is incident but the illustration of character? Asked in exam. With this, he showed how story and character are inseparable, woven together like threads of the same fabric. Importantly, he also dismissed the idea that novels must carry a conscious moral purpose. Instead, morality for him came from authenticity, from the artistic execution of the work itself. Later, between 1907 and 1909, James revisited his own novels in the New York edition prefaces. These essays introduced some of his most enduring concepts. he highlighted the idea of central consciousness, that is, point of view as the anchor of narrative form. He argued for organic structure, where form grows naturally out of subject, and he famously criticized Dickens for writing loose, baggy monsters. Can you recall another hallmark of James's theory? It was psychological realism. He believed dramatization, interiority, and dialogue created a truer art than heavy exposition. His admiration for Balzac, Turgenev, and Flaubert shows this commitment. Writers he praised for their seriousness of art, though he critiqued Maupassant for lacking depth. The legacy of Henry James lies in this. He pioneered a genuine theory of the novel asked in exam, lifting it from mere entertainment to the level of high art. His ideas directly influenced modernist techniques of narrative perspective and psychological depth. While someone like T.S. Eliot dismissed him for being too technical, later critics recognized James as a master craftsman who set the groundwork for 20th century fiction. So, whenever you think of Henry James, remember the art of fiction, the direct impression of life, the unity of character and incident, the central consciousness, and his vision of the novel as one of the highest artistic achievements. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 5, Victorian Criticism Unlocked. We walked through the major movements: Realism, Naturalism, Symbolism, Magic Realism, and Aestheticism, met the great voices of the age from Carlyle to Arnold, and traced how Victorian thought set the stage for modernism and beyond. Remember, every thinker we covered is more than just a name. They're potential anchors for your UGC exam preparation. So keep revisiting the quotes, the dates, and those exam-marked highlights. And don't forget, you already have everything neatly packed: video lessons, PDFs, classroom notes, last-minute revision notes, and PYQs. All of it is available anytime in the app. So pause here, review your notes, and when you're ready, download the app now and continue your journey with the next chapter. Your consistency today is the key to cracking the exam tomorrow.